everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of Level Grinders Podcast. This is Games Are Fun production. You may be wondering, what is Level Grinders? This is a monthly podcast created to discuss RPGs, JRPGs, which are still my favorite genre of video games. The name of the show is based off of a process within RPGs known as level grinding, quote unquote. Or the process of repeatedly fighting monsters to gain enough experience points, abilities, levels, etc., to gain an edge for the player in the next section of the upcoming section of the game, or for even some cases, the rest of the entire game. Joining me on this journey, episode number 1 here, I have my brother, Lordly King S. himself, Stephen Beegle. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Very excited to kick this off with probably one of our favorite childhood games, right?
Yeah. Thanks for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. I didn't want to just be me ranting and raving about this game for, half an hour, however long it's going to take. So I appreciate having someone here to talk about it with me. So just real quick, as mentioned before, Level Grinders is a Games Are Fun production. So while this podcast will have its own feed on your favorite podcast platforms, news about the show will be distributed via the Games Are Fun social media accounts, and video content will air on the Games Are Fun YouTube channel. So make sure you're following Games Are Fun on all your social platforms, and give us a subscribe on YouTube as well if you haven't already. We'd really appreciate that. For our very first episode here, I've been trying to kind of leave a little bit of mystery behind it. Although if you've listened to some of the other Games Are Fun podcasts, you might already know what it's going to be. But I just wanted to start with saying that I feel like this is probably my favorite RPG of all time. There's a lot of really great ones out there, old ones, new ones, some as big as your head. But this one, I think, as of right now, is my favorite. This is one that I kind of grew up with. This is a big part of my childhood and has totally stood the test of time. And that game, y'all ready for it, is Super Metroid. just kidding. That's a different podcast. Chrono Trigger. We are going to be talking about Chrono Trigger today. Like I said, this is probably my favorite RPG of all time, amongst many great ones that I would have in my top 3 and top 5. Most of them are going to be in the, sort of the old school, I guess, era of gaming. Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1 are where most of my favorite RPGs are going to land. But there's been some really good ones here recently. Both JRPG and, Western RPGs too. So just to kind of touch base on that. So while we're talking about Chrono Trigger today, and I'm sure we'll be talking about other old school or golden era JRPGs, of yesteryear, we're also going to be talking about some other RPGs that, may have struck our fancy, at any point in gaming, really. So, and this is going to be kind of, the games that we discuss, we'll probably talk about internally, but we'll also, we're open to hearing what the audience might like to hear about, or, maybe someone could give their input. Maybe we'll have some guests on the show, but it's going to be a fun time either way. So, Stephen, any opening thoughts you have before we jump right on in?
I don't think so. Other than just to back up that this was a big part of our childhood. Now, you played majority of it, and I was kind of spectating. I always enjoyed watching you play this. So, while the hands-on experience may not be very robust for me, I have enjoyed countless hours of watching people beat this game. So it's basically a show or a movie for me at this point.
Yeah. And this is an interesting one too, because this is a game that growing up, we never owned. I think we maybe pretty much had it on permanent rental. But yeah, never actually owned a copy of the game physically. So there's been digital version releases a couple times, and some other versions, which we'll get into here a little bit. But so yeah, Chrono Trigger is it just had its 25-year birthday last year, in 2020. So that's, pretty big news there. Also, so yeah, it was in 1995, originally released on Super Nintendo, and there's been some other versions that came out since then, which I alluded to. It came out. There were versions on PS1, Nintendo DS, mobile, and Steam. And while they're all, basically running on the original version, there have been some tweaks added to those other versions that we'll touch on a little bit later. So, just to get started, right off the bat, we'll go with story. So this has an interesting story. It's rooted in time travel, which for me is a big plus. I love time travel wherever I can get it. It's one of my favorite, I guess, sci-fi or fantasy tropes that are out there. So heavily, heavy references to time travel, and it's a major gameplay mechanic. And it comes down to like any JRPG. It's the impending doom of the planet, and how we're just a group of youngsters trying to save the planet from total destruction. And you play a silent protagonist, Chrono, who, if you've seen the artwork, he looks a hell of a lot like Goku. In fact, the character art was done by the same artist that was the main artist for Dragon Ball Z characters, and the like. So that explains a lot why there's certain obvious likenesses to the characters. And so just kind of from the start, I mean, I'm not going to break down the story beat for beat, but you start off boy meets girl at the Millennial Fair. Girl instantly latches on to boy. I guess she's very thirsty. I don't know. I mean, when you look like Goku, who's going to resist, right? So, you're kind of wandering around the fair. You're having a nice little first date with this random person you've never seen before in your life. And you meet your friend Luca, who is a young genius, her and her father, who just built a teleportation machine, right? And it's just a very small distance, 10, 20 feet apart, these little pods. One person goes in one pod, they fire it up, they come out the other pod completely intact. So Chrono's the guinea pig here. He's apparently literally the first person to do this. I don't know how they got clearance to show this off at the fair without having tested it first. But Chrono just, wanting to impress his new lady friend, jumps in, comes out the other side totally unscathed. And she says to herself, hey, that looks fun. I can do that. So she jumps in too. But there's a very strange reaction that happens when she goes in, and she gets sucked into a time portal. And Chrono, being the gallant young man that he is, jumps right in after her. And so the time travel begins, fighting various monsters and leveling up and doing all the JRPG stuff along the way. So, and what are your thoughts on the story?
Yeah, so from then, that's where it all kind of kicks off, and just the story wise and how it can be affected through different choices that you make. There's certain things that you can do within that Millennial Fair that'll affect what your ending will be later on in the game, and then going into that initial jump into the past, I think gets into one of my favorite areas of the game as well, because you have a lot of kind of this prehistory to Chronos time, just a couple hundred years ago, getting to see what's going on in the land at that point. And you can also see contrasts of, so if you do a little bit of exploration of the map prior to go into your designated checkpoints, and then you go from the future or go from the present into the past, there's noticeable differences on how things are changing around there based off of certain things that have happened in the story that you're about to go to. So it's that time travel thing that you had mentioned is a really, they played it really well. They played it really well in this game. And then, from that point, I believe it's 600 AD mm-hmm. is what you end up going back to, right?
Yep.
From that point, you do some work back there, save the day, end up rescuing the damsel, and then you basically try to bring her back to the present, and some trouble ensues. Of course, for the Chrono himself is caught in the middle of this whole thing that is kind of put in play. He ends up going to jail, right? And then has to break out of jail, find the girl again, and then of course escape the captors, and another jump is made into, this time, the far future, where basically, instead of seeing what has happened just a few hundred years ago in the past, now we're seeing what's happening 1,000 years plus in the future, and it's a very stark difference between where you came from and where you end up, because the world has, in essence, ended, which is another great portion to the game as well.
Yeah, yeah. And like you mentioned, there's your actions sort of ripple out between the other timelines, and some of those are very obvious, some of them not so obvious, some of them interacting with a person in the past may affect the way one of their ancestors behaves towards you in the future. So things like that are really, those little details that they throw in there are very nice. Some, like we mentioned, you can see very obvious on a large scale, and other ones are much more smaller. And that's, really great kind of immersion that gets put into it. But yeah, and through these different time periods that you visit, each one has its own set of problems, unique scenarios for you to handle. Usually results in you acquiring a new team member, which this game has a very fantastic line of teammates. It's they're maybe not the most fleshed out in a way, but they're fun, they're enjoyable. They make the experience, what it is, and so yeah, I mean, it's really great the way everything just sort of blends together and becomes a really cohesive experience. And some of those characters that you meet have very important implications in multiple timelines across, essentially eons. And, it's kind of cool watching all that stuff play out. And yeah, I'm trying to think of things without spoiling. I mean, it's a 25-year-old game, right? So it's, most people have probably played it, but I imagine, there's maybe people listening that haven't played it. I was actually just watching a streamer this weekend, playing through some games, and someone asked, "Have you ever played Chrono Trigger?" They were playing another retro RPG, one that we'll probably end up talking about at some point, but while they were playing, someone asked, "Have you ever played Chrono Trigger?" And their answer was no. So granted, I'm sure they've seen the game. They know what it is. They probably know a good deal about it. They're a speedrunner, so they've probably seen speedruns of the game. But, that being said, I'm trying to remain somewhat spoiler free here. But I know we'll have some, for those that are watching or that are listening on podcasts, we are going to be putting this up on YouTube. And we do have some video to go along with our discussion here. And some of that in its own might be a little spoilery. So, take everything with a, kind of a grain of salt, or just with the knowledge that there may be some spoilers. But was there a story beat that was maybe one of your favorites in the game, or favorite part for you?
Yeah, it would be the portion that takes place in Zeal, 10,000 BC. So after some adventuring, there's a ton that happens in between what we were just mentioning, and even going to the future, which is seen now on the video. But then there's a lot more that goes on in between there, and you get to go into the far past, or I guess in this case it would be the mid past, which is about 10,000 BC. And some great story.
12,000.
What's that?
12,000.
12,000 BC. Thank you. Again, hands-on is not so much, but it's a lot. So the 12,000 BC era, basically, you end up back there, and a lot of story takes place. You get a lot of background on the big bad. You get introduced to some pretty fun villains that are within the game itself, and then you have introduction of your vehicle comes in. There's a lot of these different things that all kind of come together. It's kind of a focal point for the game where a lot of things come together, and it gives it sets the path. It sets the path on where you're heading to in an absolute way. And the lore that comes in on that as well is a incredible trip in that port. 12,000 BC is by far, and the music, of course, is a great piece of that as well.
Yeah, that's really really a major, like you said, major plot points that happen there. But it's also just, aesthetically, it's the most interesting area because on the one hand you have, and again, a little bit of a spoiler here. On the one hand, when you're sort of just on foot, you're in a very desolate, snow-covered, ice age ridden wasteland. Basically, there's nothing there. The people that live there, they're in caves, they're barely surviving. But what makes this really interesting is that within this same world, there is a community above the clouds, living very prosperously. They have magical abilities.
Basically, utopia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you have these what they call sky bridge that can essentially teleport you from the ground up to this sky, cloud city or sky, floating continent, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, it's this golden age of humanity. And, on the flip side, you have that contrast of the people below who are living, like I said, they're barely surviving. And, there's very much a class difference there. The people above are, they're well aware of the people down below. They don't care because, think of like in Harry Potter, right? You have the purebloods, and then you have the muggles, right? That's basically what this is. And the purebloods, they know that the muggles are there. They don't care. They don't want to fraternize or anything. They're totally content just being cool magic users, with futuristic teleportation devices. And but yeah, it's a super cool area, again, just because on the one hand, you're just covered in snow. You go through the sky bridge the first time, and then you're in a sky oasis, and it's just so cool. And it, like I said, it makes this the most interesting era, I think, because of that. It's probably makes it the most unique of the bunch. So yeah, I think I would agree. That's definitely one of the best story points. And at that point, you are getting pretty late into the game, so it would make sense that there's a lot of plot and a lot of story driven content that we get there. But kind of going back to a piece that you mentioned earlier, where the main protagonist Chrono goes to jail, and this is a part where things that you do when you first meet. I don't know how her name's pronounced. I call her Marl. I think it might technically be Marley. But basically she's sort of the main female protagonist. She, immediately latches onto Chrono, follows him around. Turns out you find out very quickly that she is a princess of the royal family, the Kingdom of Guardia. And so as you're sort of escorting her around, there's certain actions that you can take that seem like they would make no difference at all. And when you come back from, the past, when you rescue her after she got sucked into the time portal, people will come back, and because you're accused of kidnapping her, of course, people will come back from the fair that will act as character witnesses either for or against you, which in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't super matter. You're still going to jail either way. But if there's enough votes that people, essentially rule you as not guilty, you do get a little care package that comes in your jail cell. But yeah, that the whole trial scene that comes with that is just a lot of fun because you're sitting there, you're like, what happened, the true events that transpired there, but you have all these people that, are saying this person kidnapped the princess. He is a menace to society. He needs to be put to death. And so yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting event, and it's something that happens early enough in the game where you're not really thinking we need to save the planet. This is just okay. My personal safety's at risk. Like what's going to happen to me right now? And it's not until you get busted out of there and you get sucked into another time portal to the future where things really start opening up and telling you what the crisis of the planet is. And and at that point,
oh,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say at that point, you get sucked into the future and you get that glimpse of the big bad coming in. Because even whenever you initially make it to the future, it's still kind of that personal safety thing. You're not so much concerned with the greater situation. It's more like, okay, we're in this place. It's terrible. How are we going to get back? And in the midst of that adventure, you come across that footage of what actually happened to the planet at that point in time. And that kind of changes the outlook, especially since Marley, is basically like, yo, listen, we've got to do something about this. Like, we have to change this just like you changed the past to save me, basically. And then you kind of get sucked into the greater good adventure.
Yep. Yeah, and it all sort of envelops from there. You go back into the other timelines. You learn what you think is the creation of the main villain, or the point where they really come into existence, and then so you're sort of chasing that lead for a while, and then sort of once you reach that point and you think, okay, like, oh, is this the end of the game? You realize there's so much more, because it was not the creation of, or the origin of the main villain. This is just a single point in the entire world's timeline where this villain was making an impact. So yes, so it's, oh my gosh, the story is so good. Like, it's funny that it's it's not this grand spectacle, but it's just the way the story unfolds is so well done. And I really appreciate the way that they did that. And I remember when I played this for the first time on Super Nintendo, and I remember having, I think it was a Nintendo Power magazine, and it had a walkthrough of the game, which basically led you up through, as I mentioned, sort of that point where you think the game might end, or where the main villain's origin took place. And then the guide at that point, right after that point, it just stops. I'm like, how am I gonna, little kid me, I'm like, how am I gonna get through the rest of this game? Because it kind of told me where I had to go. Because the game it's pretty open. You get to a point where you can pretty freely explore some of these different time eras, and it can be kind of confusing at times where exactly you need to be. So I as a kid, I did rely on the guide. As far as the second half of the game, I had to do all on my own, because the guide just sort of left me high and dry. I'm guessing maybe there was maybe a second copy I needed to buy, or maybe like a later issue that I needed to have for the rest of that. But I ended up making it through the rest of the game, and it was all fine. But yeah, as far as, we talked about gameplay, or story rather. So now I want to touch base on gameplay. So this is very much a JRPG, turn-based combat, although you do have the option. It's by default set to like active battles. So as you're sort of rummaging through your menus, trying to figure out what techniques or abilities to use, the enemy can be attacking you at that point. Of course, there is, like in Final Fantasy games, there's a wait option where you can, as you're in your menus, you can take your time trying to decide what your next move is going to be. But by default, it is set to active. But yeah, so essentially it's turn-based RPG. I would say it's, as far as pacing goes, it's I'd say on par with like a Final Fantasy and how quickly the battles move. which, for me is no big deal. I don't mind it. It feels a little bit more active than a Final Fantasy game does because there's more interaction between the enemies and you instead of, your team being on one side of the map and the enemies being on the other side and just sort of, having a back and forth. Some of these enemies will, run up to you. They'll stand right next to you. They'll move around the map a little bit, and which sort of affects your moves because you might have area of effect moves, but they don't just attack the whole screen. They attack a certain area. And monsters can then move out of that area and change the way that you might use your attacks. So there's, line driven items, there's, circular driven items, or there's some that are just, it's going to hit everyone on the map. So there is a little bit more strategy to it than say like your sort of general, Final Fantasy games. But yeah, and then to go along with that interactivity, some monsters will come up, they'll actually pick up your character and throw you sometimes into other teammates. And so yeah, it's just kind of interesting watching all that play out. And the leveling system is pretty standard for an RPG. You're gaining experience points, you're gaining ability points. The ability points then give you new abilities, magic, etc. But there's a certain point in the game where you kind of stop accruing them because you have to unlock your magical potential, and then you can start acquiring ability points again and learning new spells and whatnot. So, but yeah, it's fun combat. Like I said, it feels a little bit faster than maybe what it actually is, and that also might depend on what style, whether you do active or wait. But the battles are fun. The enemies are pretty varied. I'd say there's a pretty good variety of enemies that you run into. And that's just the battle. There's so much more to the gameplay, which we touched on a little bit, but let me hear your thoughts, Stephen.
Yeah, so you kind of dove into battle pretty well, and I think that faster pace that you were mentioning, I think it has to do with all those extra animations that come along with it compared to other turn-based JRPGs at the time. Final Fantasy 6 or 3, whenever this came out, Final Fantasy 2 / 4, whenever that came out, it was that everybody's across the room from each other type of deal, and like every so often somebody will run up and hit. Gameplay wise, the one thing that comes to mind is the slew of mini games that are involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
There's racing, there's kind of like strength based fights that you can get into. One that pops into mind, there's one right at the beginning of the game at the World Fair against a robotic cat named Gato. The song is extremely catchy. So there's a lot of those little mini games that are involved throughout. And then also your side questing too. And it's not just like a lot of the side questing is more going to get you into like fetch quests. There's a lot of fetch questing in the side questing with this game. But it has all these little things in there that just kind of keep the areas that you're in fresh and not constant turn-based combat as you're moving through each of them. The future comes to mind with one of my favorite of the mini games, which is the race with Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Bad riding I guess he is a motorcycle or something like that.
Half human, half motorcycle, something like that.
Yeah, some sort of mutant motorcycle hybrid thing that he's got going on, and you've got to race him. And it kind of breaks up this really droning, kind of sad era, and gives you a fun little mini game to play in the middle of it, so that you can, advance to the next portion of the story, basically. But
yeah, and then also again to kind of touch on it, this game does have time travel in it, and there's multiple eras to explore and interact with, and that alone is really cool. It's not just exploring a singular world. It's it's the same planet, but it's like going to different worlds because of how drastically different they all are. Aside from 2, which are pretty similar, they pretty much look the same. The 2 time periods that you'll come into pretty early on in the game, and then the other ones get much more unique and kind of stand apart from the others. And then, of course, like you said about the side missions, I think more so when you get into the late game, the side missions that you run into there, those ones are a little bit more fulfilling because it feels like you're going on kind of like grand quests, really, because the what you get out of it, the rewards that you receive are pretty large, but it's also multi-step. It's not like, hey, get me this item and I give you a thing. There's parts to it, and in most cases, those parts, you have to do some of them in one time era for it to unlock or open something up in another time era. And I think it's really smart the way that they did that.
Yeah, definitely agree, because that is one thing. Like the one side quest that comes to mind in that end game is getting Chrono his ultimate weapon,
Mm-hmm.
because it has these, do something in the far distant past. You're going millions of years in the past to do one thing, and then you're coming back to the present to try and complete that task, but turns out it was interrupted, so you have to go back to a previous era and try and stop that from being interrupted. And then the whole thing kind of unfolds as you go, and it's kind of a lot of that with a lot of the ultimate weapons as you're getting them unlocked
Mm-hmm.
throughout the game. It's just kind of doing one piece in one era, coming to another one, completing it, and using that time travel to the full extent. It's Frog, the other character, kind of has has a version of that goes for him as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great gameplay that, just using that time travel to the fullest possible potential. It's a good piece.
Yeah. Yeah, so gameplay is kind of, it's kind of one of the shining stars of this game. Again, story is good, but when you compare it against some other RPGs that have come out, it may not be the most inspiring story that you're going to come across, but it is pleasant, it's fun. There's some great moments in there, and the gameplay, I think, is what really one of the things that makes it stand out a little bit more from other RPGs. The other thing that makes it stand out, of course, is the soundtrack. This game has one of the greatest soundtracks in video game history that I've ever experienced, which is saying a lot considering we've had a lot of bangers throughout the years. So, um, let me go ahead and get started by hearing your take on the soundtrack, and maybe what some of your favorite tracks of the game are.
So knowing that we were going to be doing this, I've been listening to the soundtrack, just to get a refresher, get hyped up about the game. And the which it'd probably be a shorter list if I said which ones I didn't like, and even that is very difficult to tell, because it's even some of the thing about the soundtrack is that some of the simplest of songs, I mentioned Gato
Hmm.
back in the World's Fair, very simple, jaunty tune, but it's so catchy
Yep.
and good that, like, once you hear it, you're kind of always constantly singing it to yourself. Or
Yeah,
you get
think like in
into
in The Witcher, right? Toss a coin to your Witcher. It's got that sort of catchiness to it.
exactly, it'll get stuck in your head, and you'll be like, doo, 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 just jamming out to this, because it's a great tune. And then the World's Fair, and its music, and then some of the best stuff is whenever you get into the end game and you get into the Black Omen.
Hmm.
And the Black Omen music is just like this, and it's a persistent music. There's no battle music in the Black
Hmm.
Omen. It always has that persistent song running in the background, and it just kind of gives this feel of like, all right, here we go, stuff's going down. You're making this epic journey into the depths of this giant airship slash machine thing, and you're gonna stand toe to toe with some pretty rough characters. The Another song is the that comes to mind is the one that for your vehicle, the Epoch.
Hmm.
And again, like, whenever it comes to world travel music, you kind of want to just have this, like, all right, we're sitting back and we're rolling, and it's got that type of feel to it, sort of similar to airship music from Six, or um, uh, just kind of the overworld, gives a nice little overworld travel music to you as you're flying around to the different places to complete your end game side questing, or moving to the next position on the map for the main story, whatever it may be. But but that's another really good one that comes to mind, is the Epoch's theme as well. How about you? What are some of your favorite bangers from this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the top one for me that you already mentioned is probably going to be Black Omen.
Mhm.
I think that's like the track of the game, the one that always sticks out in my mind. The Ocean Palace, or Undersea Palace, that's another one that really, that is a really strong track. of course, the battle music, the boss music. They they're tracks that just kind of never get old to me. And then there's your sort of super boss battles that you run into that has sort of its own theme, and that's really good too. Um, and then also just sort of the overworld theme for 600 AD is another one, and it's one that like I just kind of want to stand around in that time period just because of the music that plays there. So, but yeah, it's like you said, finding tracks that I don't like would be a much shorter list, and and even going into some of the character themes, like Frog's theme is a really great track. Uh, the Kingdom of Guardia, the music for that, you walk into the castle and it's very, you know, kingdomly sounding, and and that's really great too. So yeah, it's just it's full of bangers. You
Another
know,
one is Black Tyranno layer, or
hmm.
the
Oh yeah.
yeah, that one is good. Magus's theme. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think really the Magus's castle, I think, is one that comes up that is kind of like there's really not so much music. There's not music to it. It's more of like a background noise type of thing. It's more of an ambiance sound
Yeah,
that you have going through there. So they don't really have music for it.
it creates the
Um,
atmosphere.
it really does,
Yeah.
because then whenever you do walk into the room to finally confront said wizard, you get his theme, and it just puts his presence so much more into the room than what it would if you had something moving as you're moving through. So they, again, like the ambiance of their environments sometimes don't even need music playing, because it leads up to a point where that music is actually going to kind of stand out more and make the scene stand out a little bit more. Very well orchestrated
Hmm.
game, that is for sure. It is a soundtrack that I can listen to all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Um, Yeah. So then we talked a little bit about it before, but the game has a pretty good set of characters. Again, nothing you don't get really deep into their any character driven storylines or anything. There's a little bit of it kind of later, especially later on in the game, but it's nothing that really is a major focal point. But they are very likable characters, and even Chrono as a silent protagonist, like you just can't help uh, but really enjoy him as a character. Because I mean, one, he looks cool. He looks like Goku. He wields a katana, so I mean that's pretty dope. And his moveset, his abilities in battle are very strong, which is great because I mean, for most of the game, you can't take him out of your party. So I mean, he needs to be a strong character. So, uh, but did you have a favorite amongst the group?
So, and, obviously main character Chrono. You don't get much. He's the classic hero in a JRPG. No dad, living with mom only. Has a cat, so he's got that going for him. And then him being the silent protagonist kind of gives you the ability to put your thoughts to things. So I always like that about a character, is it's not so much that they're talking for me, is I get to talk. I get to talk for them, like react to what's going on. Kind of in my own way. Granted, the game's going to move in its own, but I can kind of give my own, like, oh yeah, right, or get out of here, like, oh come on, those sort of just little reactions, and his character leaves room for that. But I would have to say, for my favorite characters, it's probably going to be Ayla. Honestly, back
Mm,
from
nice.
65 million years ago, uh, kind of hinting at her being a far distant relative of Marley within the royal bloodline, I guess you could
Hmm.
say, but very very far back. Extremely powerful character, and it probably has to do with strong female presence on the screen. Like there's not many other players or characters on the screen that are as strong, not just through her ability set and just sheer force that she puts down in a battle, but also her presence on the screen itself whenever she's there. Like it's her will be done type of situation. And I always enjoyed that within the story of her just kind of being like, you know, this is what we're gonna do. This is where we're going. We're gonna punch these reptiles in the face and save our people, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna party, right? And just a great character in my mind. One of the best.
Yeah, she's great. And the one thing that's really interesting about her is that um, she doesn't equip weapons like everyone else in the group does. She uses her bare fist for the entire game. And the thing that makes her really interesting is when she hits certain level thresholds, she basically gets a level up of her fist. Now, it takes a while to hit that point. I think the first one is at 50, um, where she gets the first one, but it creates major, major damage upgrades for her when she does hit that point. And I don't know if it's at, maybe it might be like 90 or 9. It might even be when she hits 99 and she gets the final upgrade. And when she crits, I believe, I think I've got this fact right, is that whenever she does a crit with her strongest form of her fist, is that it'll deal 9,999 damage, which for this game is a lot, because for most attacks, and even for your own HP, it's going to cap out at 999. But most attacks are going to be hitting for the hundreds until later in the game, where you might see some things hitting over 1,000. So it takes a while to get to that point. So the fact that she can deal that much damage in a single hit is absolutely insane.
That's why I see a lot of speedrunners will grab her and
Mhm.
then berserker the whole time.
Yeah.
It's like just wreck through foe after foe, no issue whatsoever. Just because these standard attacks that she does, she's incredibly powerful. Just very simple character to use, just because of that. That no weapons needed, just throw her into battle and hit the fight button.
Yep. And then you have Frog, who's just super cool. He's sort of unique in the fact that he's not a human character on the team. He is a frog, sword wielding frog, very knightly. And in the original version, the way that he speaks is kind of unique. Versus, and I think in later revisions of the game, they sort of changed that out. They kind of did retranslation and decided to have him just speak normally like everyone else. But in the original game, I thought it was, it added a little bit of charm for him, and he does get his character does get fleshed out pretty well in kind of getting to know him. There's some flashback sequences that are sort of mandatory to watch and get through, which give a little bit of insight into why he's a frog, and also his demeanor, which at first is kind of cold, distant towards the rest of the party. And so that sort of gets worked out later on. And so it's pretty interesting to sort of see his character growth. And I think he might have, out of the bunch, he might have the most growth out of the rest of them. And then
I was just gonna say, like, story, like, for each of those characters, I think one of the only characters that even comes close, but and again, it'll go to that non-human one, is Robo. Kind of has a sidetrack mission that goes through a little bit of his past, how Robo's not even supposed to be the way that he is. He kind of malfunctioned in a sense. And it goes through a whole big spiel about how, getting him back on track along with all the other Robo-type robots in the future and that sort of thing. But yeah, Frog is so, I think he's got more backstory to him than pretty much any other character that's in the game, including Luca from the beginning, or even Marley and Chrono. Like, you don't get much more. You don't find more character backstory than Frog. Not off the top of my head, anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, good cast of characters. Really enjoy them. Then one of the other big things about this game is the absolute just sheer volume, but also quantity or quality of the bosses that you encounter too. Like I said, there's a lot of variety in enemies, and there's equal amount of variety in the bosses. There's a few, there's a couple that get sort of reskin versions, ones that you encounter maybe early on, and then you sort of fight like a reskin version later. But for the most part, there's a pretty strong variety of bosses that you're going to face in the game. I think, just kind of going into like favorites and not so favorites, for me, One of my favorites is gotta be. Oh, geez, which one do I want to choose? Let me start off with the one that I don't so much care for, and that's got to be the Golem twins. Character that you meet later on in the game. His name is Dalton. What an absolute butthead he is.
Really is.
But he basically throws out these abomination creatures at you to fight you, and gosh, they can just you know those battles can go south really quickly because they'll basically whatever sort of attack you use against them, they'll turn around and use a version of that attack right back at you. So if you're using physical attacks, it's going to hit you with strong physical abilities. If you're using magic, it's going to hit you with strong magic abilities based on the element that you used. So those are pretty difficult fights, and can just be super annoying. And Dalton himself is super annoying. Um, but yeah, so I'd say that's maybe one of the ones I'm least fond of. The other one has got to be, at least when you're playing casually for the very first time, is a boss called Son of Sun. And with this boss, you're fighting this eyeball looking thing, and he's got some flames kind of sitting around him. And the thing that makes it tricky is that you can't just attack the boss outright. You have to target an individual flame. And if there's basically three like fake ones, like quote unquote, and then a real one. If you hit the real one, it'll deal some damage to the boss. And occasionally, once you find the right one and you're doing damage, it can do a roulette, which will basically shuffle all those ones around. You have to find it all over again. And so meanwhile, you're getting counterattacked. If you don't hit it right, he can throw out flares at you. So it can end up being a really challenging fight casually and very hard to figure out the mechanic your first time through. So yeah, once you sort of know how to deal with it and you know what you're looking for, it's not too bad. But yeah, first time playing that thing was rough. So
yeah, watching this is like the bosses themselves and how difficult or easy they are. I'm not going to have much to it again because not big on experience of playing the game, but those two, Dalton and the Golem twins. I think another one that crops up that kind of causes some issue is the Queen of Zeal.
Oh yeah,
her like final form, right?
Yeah,
It's
she's
her face
tough.
and 2 hands, and like I know that one is really rough whenever it comes to it. And then actually a lot of, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, like a lot of the bosses have kind of the setup where it's a main body and then two orbital somethings. A lot of times it's hands and a face, right? And this is a mechanic, or this is a boss setup that kind of proceeds throughout the entire game. Because there's another one that's like that up on top of, is it Death Mountain? Am I getting the name right? Or something Peak. What's that? Oh my god.
Yeah, I think it's just Death Peak.
Death Peak, I think. Where you find one of the gurus, he's locked up there, but before you get the guru unlocked, you have to fight a boss. Has that same type of setup where it's the 2 hands and a face. And how
yeah, okay, that's not Death Peak. Gosh, I can't remember, but the boss up there is, I think it's called the Gigas.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's got the face and it's got the 2 hands.
And you always have to take care of one or the other, right? So it's sometimes the right hand is the healing hand, the left hand is the attack hand, and then the face does like an AoE type of deal in a lot of cases. So like you kind of got to go through this process of eliminating the right piece first, and then go down and start taking care of the rest of the pieces after that. And that is a kind of a mechanic that lives throughout the game, and a lot of the fights that you end up getting into is. And this is, you thinking back on it with some of these boss fights, this has got to be one of the first ones that has this type of mechanic system to a lot of these things. I was sitting here trying to think, and like, because I cannot think of any game back then. There may be some that I didn't play that have sort of these nuanced battles where it's not just you're going in, slinging down your greatest spells and abilities to deal the most damage and get out of it. You kind of have to do a little bit more strategizing than what you had to in some of the other JRPGs or RPGs that were out at the time. I don't know if you know for sure. Is there, like, other than like maybe a Zelda where there's a lot of mechanics going on the screen, any RPGs that come to mind that?
I,
that
I
kind of meet
mean,
this kind of criteria?
I think some of the Final Fantasies have, but I feel like those are more almost like gimmick bosses. Where with Chrono Trigger, it's like it's almost every boss where there's
Mm.
some sort of mechanic like that. Uh, Whereas with Final Fantasies, there might be a couple bosses somewhere throughout the game that have multiple body parts that you need to hit or things like that. But yeah, as far as like early RPGs go, at least with my my experience, this one I think has the most sort of like that sort of setup where there's mechanics based on the various body parts.
Yeah, it definitely makes it stand out unique in this case. It's one of those things that, of all the things that I've seen or played, there's nothing, like I said, nothing's coming to mind that has boss fights like you get from Chrono Trigger. It's an interesting, unique experience, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of great ones too. Great, like we mentioned before, great music to go along with the bosses, and there's a ton. There's so many bosses in the game, which is really great.
Because you have the Yakras, you've
Yeah,
got, of course, you get to take on Magus at one point in time,
yeah.
twice, depending on if you choose
There's
to do
the
so.
dragon tank.
The
We already
dragon.
talked about the Gigas.
Mm.
There's a boss, gonna have a familiar name, but probably not exactly what you're thinking of. It's called Mother Brain. So not the Metroid Mother Brain. It's very different, but very cool looking boss for sure. Comes about later, much later in the playthrough, towards the end. It's one of those sort of late game side quests for ultimate weapon, searching and whatnot. But yeah, very cool looking boss for sure. Um, you
They
have,
kind of have joke bosses too, similar to like your Ultros type,
mhm,
kind of a joke. One that comes to mind is in the future, down in the sewers, where he's kind of got his minions running around watching you, and then you finally
yeah.
get and meet him. He's kind of just this like, "What are you doing here, kids?" That sort of deal. But it has those. Whatever, oh, man.
Oh,
What are
you
some
have
other
Ozzy too. I mean,
Ozzy?
Ozzy and his gang, they're very much, I feel like, sort of joke enemies, the lackeys of Magus that just, kind of get in their own way a little bit. Or Ozzy especially is like that. Maybe not so much Slash and Flea where they're a little bit more serious, but Ozzy specifically is very, he's definitely got that ultros role, I feel like.
Yeah, the skeleton on the bridge in
Yeah.
600.
Zombor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Yeah, there's a
That's a
bunch.
good one.
Did we mention the dragon tank? Because that's a pretty iconic one.
I think we did, but
Okay.
it should get a second mention
Yeah.
because it's good.
Yeah, definitely an iconic one. Tough
Yeah.
fight. Your first time playing the game, I'm sure a lot of people will run into the dragon tank and they're just kind of like, it makes you want to pull your hair out. But again, it's one of those things where it has the multiple body parts and you kind of have to handle it in a certain way. The game is very generous with it. They do give you, if you take the time, there's a manual that you can read that tells you what the body parts do. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a heads up before you go into the fight. But if you don't read that or you miss it and you run into this fight, it can be a bit of a challenge. So so kind of going back to what we said and just kind of wrapping up things a little bit here with the game. This has had multiple versions. Of course, the one I played originally was the SNES version. There were also versions that came out on PS1, Nintendo DS, and there's been versions on mobile and Steam. So PS1, this would probably be the one you would have had probably the most hands on with because it came in a collection with Final Fantasy VI.
Yep.
So they were both sort of relaunched, ported over onto PlayStation with some additional features. I know with six they sort of had that opening CG cutscene that they added, but
Mhm.
with Chrono Trigger they actually added some like anime cutscenes in kind of throughout the game, which was really really cool. I love that touch. Uh, at the time, I didn't mind all the extra lag that the game had. The PS1 version is super laggy.
It is.
And looking back on it, I'm like, oh my god, that was so terrible. As a kid, I didn't care because it was Chrono Trigger, and I guess this would be a copy that we physically owned. I think when I said that earlier was basically just I never owned it on Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that's when we actually bought it and owned it because I think that would have came out. So that was PS1. I'm
Hmm.
sure because we got that because Final Fantasy 3, I'm pretty sure was another one that we never really owned. It was kind of perpetual renting. Or
Yeah,
6.
you're
Those two
no,
RPGs,
we did own three. We did.
maybe not.
I might even have the cartridge still somewhere, or I might have sold it off. I'm not sure. If I did, I wish I hadn't. But
I know it wasn't one of like our original Super Nintendo games.
yeah,
That's for sure. That'd be like Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario World, things like
yeah.
that. But yeah, the PlayStation 1 was the combo and give you both of those great
Hmm.
RPGs in one. And that is whenever I finally played it myself. And ultimately what you mentioned, the lag on it is what ended up killing my run on it because like it was just so tough. It's such a slog to get through it because of all of it. It was slow load times and laggy gameplay. The anime that they added into it, the anime cutscenes were amazing. It was basically character introductions is whenever they usually would
Hmm.
throw
Yeah.
these things, which is something about Isla that stands out to me again because her cutscene was really badass
Yep.
whenever she came busting into the room, kind of.
Yeah, and Frog had the incredible one where you basically got to watch him split a mountain in two with his newly forged Masamune sword. This
Yep,
is a really cool scene.
it's good stuff.
Yeah. The DS version, I never played that, but apparently a lot of people sort of regard that as like the definitive version because it kept the cutscenes in there, but it didn't have the lag. I think there was might have been some additional cutscenes. I'm not 100% sure what all the differences are, but I do know that there was some new side quests. There was a new dungeon that was added in. So a lot of new content got put into that one, which I think also carried over to the mobile and Steam versions, which I think those had a very, very rocky start to them. I did buy the Steam version, and it's it's not my favorite, but I also know that it's been patched probably since I played it, where they did some things to make it a little bit better and make it feel like a little bit more like the classic experience, but still having those extras that came in later versions. So yeah, I might have to check that version out again. I know one of the things that kind of threw me off was the retranslation of the game, which I think started with the DS version, and so I had never witnessed that before, and I got to tell you, I wasn't ready for it, and I think the
Mm.
biggest one probably came with Frog's dialogue because it is very different. So yeah, it's certain lines that and not even any significant lines in the game or dialogue lines, I should say, but they were ones that like I was just expecting to read as I played through, and then it was like totally reworked. I'm like, what am I reading? Like this is not Chrono Trigger. Um, but yeah, in the end, like I should probably give the Steam version another try just so that I can get around to that extra content later in the game.
I've been eyeballing the Steam version myself because, again, this isn't a game that I've finished myself, and it's always one that I've enjoyed watching and haven't enjoyed playing whenever it was on the PlayStation, just not through the lag. Um, the soundtrack and the boss fights, like it was always a game that I enjoyed, just never finished. And I've been eyeballing the Steam one um, for quite some time now, but the backlog is always thick, so.
Yep.
Uh, it's kind of held me back on it.
Yep. The backlog is real for sure. Um, Now, the other way this game is staying relevant throughout the years is there obviously people have done speed runs of the game. One of our favorite speedrunners, Puexel, uh, he'll occasionally hop on Twitch and he'll stream the game every so often. He's done runs at GDQ along with other RPGs. So we know it's staying relevant because of speedruns, but also recently there's been a lot of games getting randomizers, and Chrono Trigger has also received a couple randomizers. And for those watching the YouTube version, all the footage that's on is from my first randomizer playthrough of Chrono Trigger, which was a lot of fun. It's a really great way to play the game. I'm familiar enough with the classic version that I I'm not missing anything. I know what all the story beats are and everything, and so I feel I wouldn't recommend doing a randomizer first before you've actually played or understand the plot of the original. Like I would definitely experience that first, whether you play it yourself or watch a let's play or something like that, before going into a randomizer. But yeah, so there's two of them. Originally, Wings of Time was released, which is it's randomized Chrono Trigger, and then I think more recently was Jets of Time, which is something to make the randomizer experience go a little bit faster, which is the one that I played. So I guess it's from my understanding is that the items that you're collecting just kind of speed things up a little bit. I think maybe experience levels and ability point amounts that you get per battle are elevated to help you level up faster, unlock abilities faster, things like that. So that because you are basically playing through this game. I mean, if on my first run, I'm looking at about probably 5.5 hours total of it. I think, the people that are running it regular are probably getting like 2.5 hours from what I understand. So you can get through it fairly quickly if you have good routing, if if you get a good seed, things like that. But yeah, it's really cool. I've experienced other randomizers with Super Metroid, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, basically Super Nintendo games, which are I don't know, they're I love Super Nintendo so much. So
Yeah, with these randos, don't they like they basically start you off at the epoch, right?
they do,
And then
yes,
and then
yep.
you just head off and start unlocking and progressing.
Yep. So you get the equivalent of what would be the game's airship, which also allows you to travel through time and explore the different eras. Now, to start, there is sort of a progression that you go along with. You can't just now. I'm sure there's ways to randomize it, but on purely default settings, there's sort of a set progression where I only had access to begin with 1000 AD and 600 AD, and then as you collect certain key items you're able to go into the other time periods and then of course unlock other things, and it seems like it's all related to the key items that you would normally get in the original game. Certain key items will unlock certain quests, different timelines, things of that nature. So your ability or quickness in finding those certain key items will unlock parts of the game a little bit faster. So I wasn't able to just go straight to 12,000 BC into going into the Kingdom of Zeal and everything like that. Wasn't able to do that right off the bat. There was still progression locks to keep me from going to those points, but the randomization was done really well. Like I said, I felt like it almost felt a little easy, to be honest. And again, there's always settings that you can put into when generating a seed that can offer more challenge. But again, this was my first one. So I went with just whatever the default was. And I felt it to be a pretty good, um, mostly balanced experience, if not just a little on the easy side. But it's been really fun. It's a great way to re-experience the game.
Excellent.
And at some point, I might attempt to stream one of them if I can get my time down from like 5.5 hours. So I don't know
Yeah,
if I have it in me to do.
because Super Metroid and Link to the Past, your randomizers there, you can do them in one sitting
Yeah.
whenever you're on fire with it. So yeah, man, I would love to see you do it. Jets of Time. It'd be so good. I catch little bits of them, but like I would watch yours because usually I end up just tuning out on the other ones. But yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll see. I do want to get into a SMZ3 randomizer.
Hmm.
I've been, not to get too off topic here, but I've been practicing my Super Metroid randomizer, and I've gotten a lot better at some of the skills required to do different sequence breaks and tricks and things like that. So, um, and I've been pretty confident with Link to the Past for a while now. So I think I'm just about at the point where I could tackle an SMZ3. So that's something kind of on my wish list of things to stream. So anyway, so yeah, we've been talking about Chrono Trigger for a while now. Hopefully, if you haven't played this game yet, I hope that this discussion here has inspired you to give it a try. Like I said, it is available on Steam. I know most people probably have that. System requirements aren't going to be large by any means. And with the patches that it's received, I think you can be a little bit more confident that you're going to get a solid experience on there. I think people that were really upset with the way that it launched have been really happy with the patches and fixes that have been done to create a better experience. So, with that being said, Steven, do you have any final thoughts you wanted to share about Chrono Trigger?
If anything, check out the soundtrack because there's some really great tunes to it
100%.
to get you through a couple hours of your day. And if you can and want to see this game really in action, try and find a speedrunner running it because they can usually get you through 100% and get you a good idea on what the game, what's happening within a handful of hours. And always a good watch, especially if Quexel's ended up playing it or something along those lines. Always a good time watching it. Other than that, I'm inspired. I want to play it. It's on my list. It is. Along with so many other things, but this is one of those games that slowly creeps up, and it's kind of like this should be the next thing that I do, or a project of some kind that I should put behind it, whatever it may be. But it's a great one. There's no denying it. That's why I'm here, is to talk about this awesome game that I've never actually really played the whole way through.
Yep. Like when I was thinking of making this show a reality, I had to really sit down and I'm like, okay, what's going to be the game to kick this off? What is my favorite RPG? Which one do I really want to talk about more than anything else? And this was that game. In my eyes, it's just that good. It holds up. It's really incredible. It is I think a pillar that other JRPGs, were essentially founded upon because of how good this game was and still is, really. So I encourage everyone, if you haven't played it, definitely give it a try. It's not super long by RPG standards. We have these days, games like Persona that take 100+ hours to complete. This isn't that. This is, you could probably get by, with a decent enough pace. I'd say this is like a 30-hour RPG, 40 tops. So
if you really take your time through and you do the level grinders thing, but there's and being fans of speedruns, we'll mention all the time, there's guides out there that get you through the game faster than that, even if you want to just like breeze through it really quick and make sure you're getting the right stuff to make that be able to happen for you. That stuff's available to you as well. So
yep. So this is the first episode of Level Grinders. I hope y'all enjoyed it.
Wait, question for you.
Yes.
Do you think we'll get into a like a lore dump for the Chrono series? Because there's Chrono Cross. There's that one that what is it? What's the one that's in between the two of them? Kind of the filler text-based game that they have.
Oh, I don't know. Is there I know there was I think there was a lot of rumors going around. There was going to be a game called Chrono Break that never ended up being a thing.
Yeah, Square came in and destroyed that.
Yeah.
But there's an actual, it's a text-based game. It falls between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross to kind of link the two stories together a little bit better than what they were before. But it's out there. Maybe you should check that out. Because I'd be down for a lore discussion on this game because it goes deep. I like it.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't even think I knew that existed. Obviously, I knew Chrono Cross existed. Maybe that'll be a game we touch on another episode. But yeah, I'll have to look into that because I just had no idea that was a thing. There were some definitely some very obvious lines being drawn between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross within Chrono Cross, especially towards the end. Very, very strong ties there, direct ties. So yeah, I'll have to check that out to see, what because if you played the when they added the cutscenes to the game, there was a cutscene at the very end of Chrono Trigger that sort of really left things open for more context. And I think Chrono Cross touched on it a little bit, but I don't think it was ever really fully explained, and you never really see what happens to the main cast of Chrono Trigger after that, except a little bit. I think you get a little bit more background on Luca, but I think that's about it.
It's
from
called Radical Dreamers.
Okay.
Radical Dreamers. Nusameni Hoseki, I think is how it's pronounced.
Interesting.
And it basically, all those little tie-ins that you're looking for at the end of Chrono Trigger and at the beginning of Chrono Cross, it has it. And the story of it is pretty incredible. And I'd love for you to at least check out, because I check out speedruns of it or read over what it is. Like, because after I watched, it was basically a trilogy playthrough. Chrono Trigger, then Radical Dreamers, and then Chrono Cross. It was a speed run. I think it was maybe RPG Limit Break that was doing it. And it was a relay. It was a relay. So it was 3 teams going through these 3 games, and there was people discussing lore as they were going through each of them and how things are connected to it. Especially for Radical Dreamers being a more text-based game, they needed to have somebody, this is what's actually happening right now. Here's the story that's going on with it. And it took me into a wormhole, a rabbit hole, if you will, to where I just started digging into Chrono lore, and some really interesting stuff plays out in that Radical Dreamers games that really does connect the two. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. So maybe in the future sometime. Maybe in the future.
And now that you mention it, I think I have heard of it, and I know in Chrono Cross there's a traveling band called Radical Dreamers in the game. So yeah, that's an interesting tie-in itself. So cool. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. So with that said, then that again concludes the first ever episode of Level Grinders. Thank you everybody that listened, whether on podcasts or you checked it out on YouTube. Like I said, there's a little bit of footage of the randomizer that I played in there. So if you're interested in seeing any gameplay, definitely check that out while listening to our discussion here. If you like this, please make sure to leave a review on whatever podcast service you're listening to. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to Games Are Fun on YouTube. If there's a game you'd like to see discussed on this show, or you want to be a part of a future discussion on the show, reach out to us at Games Are Fun Pod on Twitter. You can join our Discord, which is invite.gg/gamesareFun, or contact us at contact@gamesarefunpodcast.com. So yeah, just ending things out here. Stephen, where can people find you?
Lordly King S. everywhere. So you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and coming soon YouTube? ? But yeah, Lordly King S.
All right, sounds good. And you can catch me on Twitch and Twitter at AdamPalooza85. And that's been it from Level Grinders. Thank you again, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.